Black Ops 4 made the choice to give the player a lot of abilities and power right off the bat in every single game of zombies. This leads to an unsatisfying early game, where the player has too much power and doesn't feel any tension or challenge in the early rounds, which doesn't cultivate a fun gameplay experience. While there are many gameplay dynamics that disrupt this early game balance, we're going to take a look at how the Elixir system is implemented and how it could have been altered in order to promote a better sense of escalation, progression, leading to more interesting and engaging early rounds. Before we adjust the Black Ops 4 implementation of Elixirs, I want to take a look at the Black Ops 3 equivalent system, Gobblegums. Both Gobblegums and Elixirs serve the purpose of providing a small ability or perk to the player. Back in Black Ops 3, they were implemented as the Gobblegum system. With the Gobblegum system, before the game starts, the player would choose 5 gums to use in a single zombies game. Once in-game, the player would need to find a Gobblegum machine and spend points in order to spin it and get one of the 5 gums they had selected for that match. If the player wanted to choose a different gum, they would need to re-roll the Gobblegum machine at the cost of more points. Perhaps the biggest downside to this system was the fact that it restricted the player's strategy regarding the specific order of which they used their Gobblegums. However, one of the most engaging parts to the system is the fact that gums are in a random order. Having a random order forces players to keep spinning the Gobblegum machine if they want to get the most out of their Gobblegum usage. While this forced players to be engaged and keep track of what gums came in which order, it might have been slightly too random and restrictive. If a player wanted to use a specific gum before another gum, it would be completely random chance for that to happen. This is both a positive and a negative, because on one hand, the randomization forces the player to be reactive and make the most of their situation and work for their success, instead of just handing out exactly what the player wants when they want it. However, we have to recognize the fact that this randomization also prevents a fair amount of strategic utilization of specific gums. Perhaps the perfect example of this has to be Temporal Gift. This is a gum that was in Black Ops 3 that was regarded as one of the worst gums in the game. It was simply not worth running because of the fact the player had no control over when it would show up in the Gobblegum machine. However, in Black Ops 4, with how Treyarch implemented the Elixir system, it is, by far, one of the most popular classic Elixirs in the game, due to the fact that the player is now in control of when that Elixir is being consumed. And that is perhaps the most precious upside to the Elixir system that we can try and preserve. The added depth and strategy players have with these abilities gives an incredible amount of replayability and player engagement in every single zombies match. However, this upside is not without its drawbacks. As I stated in the intro of the video, this is perhaps too much power for a player to hold as soon as they spawn in. So this begs the question, how do we re-implement Elixirs in order to maintain the level of depth and strategy that the new Elixir system offers, and also recapture the exciting level of engagement and escalation that we had with the Black Ops 3 Gobblegum system? The answer comes in the form of a combination of both systems. First things first, we still have the player select a certain number of elixirs from a large pool of elixirs that they will be restricted to using in any given game. Once the player is in-game, they will need to find a machine, like a Gobblegum machine, and spend points to purchase a random one of their pre-selected elixirs. This is how the Black Ops 3 Gobblegum system works currently. However, the minor change that we are going to implement is that instead of holding just one Gobblegum at a time, the player will be able to purchase another elixir from the machine and actually be able to hold up to 5 elixirs at a time. With this minor change, we are able to maintain the random reactionary fun of the Black Ops 3 Gobblegum system, as well as have players earn the in-depth strategy and engagement of the Black Ops 4 Elixir system. This also solves our problem with the early game, as with this system, elixirs will take points to spend at specific locations of the map. The developers, without their fancy new point system, link in the icon above, will be able to balance the early game power level of the player to promote a more engaging and challenging experience. Of course, with this new implementation, there are some minor details that we need to think through and make sure we haven't broken any other part of the game. First things first, let's talk about the easy stuff, the user interface. One might question how we select one of our elixirs once we have more than one. We have two options here. The first one, we could take the Black Ops 4 approach and just have each elixir mapped to a single button. While this may work well for a PC where there are numerous keys to bind to different functions, this will be difficult to implement on a controller where we are limited to a restrictive amount of buttons. The solution, however, has already been implemented into a Call of Duty Zombies game. Infinite Warfare Zombies. With their Fate and Fortune card system, players would be able to cycle through their 5 different cards with the D-pad and then use a single button to activate it when the time is right. Not to mention in Call of Duty multiplayer, players use the D-pad exclusively to select and activate their kill streaks. This would be the solution that I would implement into this new Elixir system. Traditionally, players could choose up to 5 gums in Black Ops 3 and 4 elixirs in Black Ops 4. I would like to promote that we increase this limit to something like 10, or even something crazy like 15 different elixirs. Keep in mind that with my elixir system, players would still be restricted to holding onto 5 different elixirs at a time, but when purchasing their elixir from the machine, they would be able to receive any one of the 10 to 15 they pre-selected before the match. The reason behind this is that this would promote even more strategy and long-term engagement of the Elixir system. With Black Ops 4 Elixirs and Black Ops 3 Gobblegums, I felt that 4 or 5 choices were too restricting for the player. For example, if I wanted to use the Elixirs Perk Up and Wall Power in Black Ops 4, that would take up half of my Elixir slots for the entire match. This is because elixirs like Perk Up and Wall Power are more likely to be a one-time use elixir than other elixirs like Cashback or Immolation Liquidation. Which means with the old implementation, you would need to spend a large percentage of your Gobblegum or Elixir slots with a gum or elixir that you probably use only one time per game, which restricts the player's choice and strategy even further. However, if the player was allotted 10 to 15 elixirs, this would allow players to more comfortably use a large variety of elixirs in every single zombies match. Players could strategize and use elixirs like Perkaholic and Wall Power to get set up quickly, and then exchange those elixirs with long-lasting and high-round useful elixirs like Cashback and In Plain Sight. Overall, the more options you give players, the more strategy that will be cultivated from that level of freedom. And as an added bonus for Activision, the player base would probably feel more comfortable using more elixirs, leading to more microtransaction sales for zombie players. Now, there is one major implementation dynamic that I sort of glossed over. What happens to the elixirs once they are used? Are they consumed like in the Black Ops 3 Gobblegum system, or are they persistent like the Elixir system in Black Ops 4? Well, if they are consumed like the Black Ops 3 Gobblegum system, this would force the player to repurchase the elixir every time they want to use it. In that case, having 10 to 15 different elixirs to cycle through in order to replenish one would be incredibly annoying. On the other hand, if they are persistent like the Black Ops 4 Elixir system, this might be too easy for players and lead to a system that isn't engaging as we want it to be. This could lead to boring high rounds where once the players have the 5 elixirs they want, they no longer are actively purchasing more elixirs from the machine. As you can see, there truly isn't a clear, correct answer in this situation. Every type of implementation will have some positives and some negatives. That being said, since it is my redesign, I'm going to choose the persistent implementation, and let me tell you why. While players might be able to choose their 5 favorite elixirs in the late game high rounds, there are other balancing factors to consider. For example, while the player may not lose the ability to use their cashback elixirs, players may only have a limited supply of those elixirs thanks to how the microtransaction system is in zombies. And it is that minor detail that I believe will lead to that variety of elixir usage across the board. Once a player uses what they feel is a lot of cashback elixirs, they might want to exchange that slot for a Free Fire or Alchemical Antithesis elixir. And with my redesign, that would be entirely possible, once again leading to more engagement and of course more elixir usage, which leads to more microtransaction sales and therefore a more successful system. Another minor detail we need to talk about is how the player would exchange these elixirs for a different one if they are all persistent. The solution is easy. Like we said before, the player would cycle through their elixirs like they cycled through their Fate and Fortune cards in Infinite Warfare Zombies. And if they purchase an elixir and they were already at the 5 elixir maximum, the new elixir would replace the elixir that the player had selected or highlighted. Of course, because we have persistent elixirs, like in Black Ops 4, we are going to need to have some sort of balancing factor to make sure players can't spam these powerful elixirs. For my re-implementation, we are going to add a cooldown to all of these elixirs. For the most part, the cooldown system in Black Ops 4 would serve our purpose just fine, with one huge alteration. Classic elixirs. Back when Black Ops 4 was released, the cooldown on classic elixirs was relatively speedy. Then Treyarch released an update fairly early into the lifecycle of Black Ops 4 that heavily nerfed the cooldown time for classic elixirs, slowing the recharge time for them down to an agonizing crawl. This is the one change I would undo. Don't get me wrong, I understand why the change was made, to encourage players to use rarer elixirs and therefore engage in their microtransaction system. However, I do not believe the classic elixirs need such a slow cooldown time. The rare consumable elixirs, in theory, should be more powerful, useful, and enticing to use than the classic elixirs, and that alone should be the balancing factor used with restricting the player's use of classic elixirs. So in my system, the classic elixirs would have a significantly faster cooldown time than the one we see in Black Ops 4. The next dynamic we are going to discuss about my redesign of the Elixir system is the 1 elixir per round restriction that Black Ops 4 puts on all of the elixirs. The reason behind this restriction is to balance the more powerful elixirs by preventing players from spamming something like Alchemical Antithesis or Power Vacuum multiple times per round. The downside to this comes in the super late rounds, where having the ability to use elixirs more than once could speed up rounds or aid the player's survival. For my redesign, I am going to choose to remove this restriction, for practically the same reason I decided to have the elixirs be persistent. Players have a limited supply of these powerful rare elixirs, and a majority of players would simply not be comfortable spamming their powerful and rare elixirs. I do not believe removing this restriction would be nearly as game-breaking as Treyarch seems to believe, especially since dashboarding to save elixirs is no longer something that can be done in Black Ops 4. Controversially, I really like this change. Of course, I do miss having unlimited amounts of every single Gobblegum. I recognize just how detrimental to the core balance that dynamic is. So, in my redesign, dashboarding to save elixirs will not be something I would implement. Simply put, it would give players literally endless amounts of elixirs that would completely decimate the overall balance of the entire elixir system. The Elixir system implemented into Black Ops 4 doesn't get a lot of attention. It's often overshadowed by the new point system and new perk system, and if it is mentioned, it's usually in some throwaway line where the player feels like it simply isn't as good as the Gobblegum system in Black Ops 3. Which is unfortunate, because I rarely ever see anyone recognize the positive aspects of the Black Ops 4 Elixir system. Having more than one elixir available to use at any given time cultivates player engagement and allows for more strategy and planning, and therefore more rewarding gameplay. Hopefully, by combining these two systems into my redesign, I was able to create a system that produces an engaging and strategic long-term zombies game while keeping the early rounds challenging and full of tension. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on my redesign. And of course, thank you so much for watching, and thank you all for your support on this channel. Be sure to subscribe for more zombies content, and until the next absolutely beautiful zombies morning, I'll catch up with you guys later. And as always, stay beautiful.